Welcome to today's episode. Picture this. Roughly 200,000 years ago, in the scorched landscapes of East Africa, a new species takes its first breath. Homo sapiens, us. We are fragile, outnumbered, and surrounded by predators far stronger than we could ever hope to be. We have no claws, no fangs, no thick hide to protect us from the elements. By every measure of survival in the natural world, we should have been extinct within a few generations. Yet somehow, against impossible odds, we didn't just survive, we thrived. We conquered every continent on Earth. We built cities that touched the sky, created art that still moves us to tears millennia later, and developed technologies that transformed the very fabric of reality. How did we do it? How did these vulnerable primates become the dominant force on planet Earth? The answer lies in something invisible, something that exists only in our minds. Our ability to cooperate, to imagine, to believe in things that don't physically exist. Gods, nations, money, justice, empires. These are all fictions, yet they are the most powerful forces in human history. They allowed small bands of hunters to become vast civilizations numbering in the millions. They transformed nomadic wanderers into empire builders. They turned scattered tribes into unified nations that could mobilize armies, construct monuments, and leave legacies that echo through eternity. Today, you're about to witness the most extraordinary story ever told. This is not a tale of superheroes or fantasy kingdoms. This is the real story of humanity's rise from the African savanna to the marble halls of Rome. You'll walk alongside the first humans who dared to leave Africa. You'll witness the birth of agriculture, the foundation that made everything else possible. You'll see the first cities emerge from the mud of Mesopotamia, watch Egypt's pyramids rise stone by stone, and stand in the forums of Athens as democracy takes its first uncertain steps. You'll march with Alexander's armies, sail with Phoenician traders, and watch as Rome transforms from a small village into an empire that ruled the known world. This is our story. This is how we became us. Chapter 1. The Dawn of Humanity. The sun rises over the Great Rift Valley in East Africa, casting long shadows across the grasslands where our story truly begins. Around 300,000 years ago, in what is now Morocco and Ethiopia, Homo sapiens emerges as a distinct species. We are not the first humans, not by a long shot. Neanderthals roam Europe and Western Asia, perfectly adapted to the Ice Age cold. Homo erectus still survives in isolated pockets across Asia. Denisovans inhabit the mountains and forests of Siberia. But something about Homo sapiens is different. Something that will eventually allow us to outlast and replace all our cousins. Our brains are not significantly larger than those of Neanderthals. In fact, Neanderthal brains are sometimes bigger. But the structure is different. The shape of our skulls, particularly the development of our frontal lobes, gives us capabilities that prove revolutionary. We can think abstractly, plan for distant futures, and most importantly, we can engage in what anthropologists call fictive language. We can talk about things that don't exist. We can tell stories about gods and ancestors. We can make plans for hunts that will happen next week. We can create social bonds through shared myths and beliefs. This cognitive revolution, which occurs somewhere between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, changes everything. Before this revolution, humans live in small bands, probably no more than 150 individuals. This number isn't arbitrary. It has approximately the maximum number of people with whom you can maintain stable social relationships based on personal knowledge and direct contact. Even today, this Dunbar's number represents a natural limit to intimate social networks. But after the cognitive revolution, Homo sapiens discovers something extraordinary. We can cooperate in large numbers with complete strangers, as long as we share common myths. Two Christians who have never met can go on crusade together because they both believe in the same God. Two Americans can cooperate in business because they both believe in dollars and the rule of law. Two ancient Egyptians can work together building a pyramid because they both believe in the pharaoh's divinity. Life for these early humans is harsh beyond modern comprehension. Infant mortality hovers around 50%. The average life expectancy is perhaps 30 years, and that's if you survive childhood. Every day is a struggle for survival. But these humans are not primitive or stupid. Their knowledge of the natural world surpasses that of most modern people. They can identify hundreds of plant species, knowing which are edible, which medicinal, which poisonous. They track animals by reading signs in the earth that would be invisible to us. They navigate vast distances without maps or compasses, using the stars, the sun, and an intimate knowledge of the landscape. They create sophisticated tools from stone, bone, and wood. They develop languages as complex as any modern tongue. They create art, music, and ritual. Around 70,000 years ago, something catastrophic happens. The Toba supervolcano in Indonesia erupts with a force almost impossible to imagine. It is one of the largest volcanic events in the past 2 million years. The explosion throws so much ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that global temperatures plummet. A volcanic winter grips the planet. Ecosystems collapse. Many species go extinct. The human population crashes dramatically. Genetic evidence suggests that at one point, the entire human species may have numbered as few as 10,000 individuals. We teeter on the edge of extinction, but we survive. And in surviving, perhaps we are shaped by the experience. The humans who make it through are the most adaptable, the most innovative, the most capable of cooperation. Natural selection forges us in fire. As the climate begins to recover, humans start to move. Small bands push out of Africa, crossing into the Middle East around 70,000 years ago. This is not a mass migration, not some deliberate expedition. It happens gradually over thousands of years. A band moves into a new valley. A generation later, some of their children move a bit further. Human population density is so low that there's always somewhere new to go, always new hunting grounds beyond the horizon. By 50,000 years ago, humans have reached Australia, crossing at least 60 miles of open ocean to get there. This requires boats, navigation skills, and considerable courage. By 40,000 years ago, humans are in Europe, encountering the Neanderthals who have lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. What happens when Homo sapiens meets these other human species? For decades, scientists believed we simply killed them off, outcompeting them for resources until they went extinct. The truth is more complex and more human. We didn't just kill them. We also loved them. Genetic studies reveal that most modern humans carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Europeans and Asians carry traces of Denisovan ancestry. Our species interbred with our cousins, created children together, shared stories around fires, and formed relationships across species lines. Yet despite this intimacy, the Neanderthals and Denisovans slowly disappear. The last Neanderthals die out around 40,000 years ago. By 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens is the only human species left on Earth. Why do we survive when they don't? The question haunts anthropology. Perhaps our ability to cooperate in larger numbers gives us an edge. Perhaps our capacity for innovation and adaptation proves crucial. Perhaps it's simply luck, being in the right place when climate changes. Most likely, it's all of these factors combined. But the result is clear. By 30,000 years ago, every human on Earth is a Homo sapiens. We are alone, the last human species, and we are spreading across every habitable continent. During these millennia, human culture explodes in complexity and sophistication. In Europe, we create the cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet, artistic masterpieces that rival anything produced today. We carve figurines from mammoth ivory, create musical instruments from bone, and develop elaborate burial rituals that suggest belief in an afterlife. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples develop sophisticated fire management techniques, essentially practicing a form of landscape engineering that will sustain them for 50,000 years. Everywhere humans go, we adapt, we innovate. We are no longer just another animal struggling to survive. We are becoming something new, something unprecedented in Earth's history. We are becoming a force that will reshape the entire planet. Chapter 2. The Agricultural Revolution. For 200,000 years, humans live as hunter-gatherers, and life follows ancient rhythms that connect us intimately with the natural world. Small bands roam vast territories, following game animals and seasonal plants. Then, around 10,000 BCE, something remarkable happens in a region called the Fertile Crescent, a sweeping arc of land stretching from the Persian Gulf through modern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine, down into Egypt. Humans begin to plant seeds intentionally. They begin to domesticate animals. The agricultural revolution begins, and nothing will ever be the same. This is not a sudden transformation. It happens gradually, over thousands of years. And it doesn't happen because ancient people wake up one day and decide farming is a good idea. Climate change drives the shift. The last ice age ends around 11,700 BCE, and global temperatures rise. Glaciers retreat. Sea levels climb. In the Fertile Crescent, the climate becomes wetter and warmer. Wild grains like wheat and barley grow abundantly. Humans who have been collecting these grains for generations notice something interesting. If you scatter seeds in disturbed soil, more plants grow the next year. It's not a huge leap from harvesting wild grains to deliberately planting them. But that small step changes everything. The first farmers are not more prosperous than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. In fact, life gets harder. Farming is back-breaking labor, requiring long hours of planting, weeding, harvesting, and processing grain. Early farmers work much harder than hunter-gatherers for fewer calories and less nutritional diversity. Their bones show more signs of stress and disease. Their teeth rot from eating grain-heavy diets. Average height decreases. So why do it? The answer is simple. Agriculture supports larger populations. A field of wheat produces far more calories per acre than the same land left wild. Those calories might be of lower quality, and obtaining them requires more work, but they can feed more mouths. Farming communities grow larger than hunter-gatherer bands. They have more children. And in the competition for territory and resources, numbers matter. By 9000 BCE, settled villages appear throughout the Fertile Crescent. Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on Earth, emerges near a spring in the Jordan Valley. At its peak, Jericho houses perhaps 2,000 people, an enormous population for the time. The inhabitants build circular stone houses, construct massive defensive walls, and erect a stone tower 8.5 meters high. Why such elaborate fortifications in this early era? Perhaps to defend against raids from jealous nomads. Perhaps to protect valuable grain stores. Perhaps as a display of collective power and identity. Whatever the reason, Jericho represents something new. People living together in large numbers, building permanent structures, creating a settlement that will outlast any individual lifetime. Agriculture spreads rapidly, but it's not simply exported from the Fertile Crescent to the rest of the world. Instead, it's invented independently in at least 7 different regions. The Fertile Crescent around 9000 BCE, China around 7000 BCE, Mesoamerica around 50 BC, the Andes and Amazonia around 5000 BC, the Eastern United States around 2500 BCE, the Sahel region of Africa around 30 BC, and New Guinea around 70 BCE. In each region, people domesticate different plants and animals based on what's locally available. Middle Easterners domesticate wheat, barley, sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle. Chinese farmers domesticate rice and millet, pigs and chickens. Native Americans domesticate corn, beans, squash, and turkeys. The specifics vary, but the pattern is universal. Humans begin to control their food supply rather than simply taking what nature provides. Domestication changes both humans and the species we domesticate. Consider wheat. Wild wheat has seeds that fall off the stalk when ripe, allowing them to spread naturally. But some wheat plants have a genetic mutation that makes their seeds stay attached longer. In the wild, this is a disadvantage because the seeds don't disperse. But for human farmers, it's perfect because you can harvest the grain more easily. So farmers save these mutant seeds and plant them next year. Over generations, wheat becomes dependent on humans to spread its seeds. It can no longer survive in the wild. We have created a new species that exists only because we tend it. But consider the perspective from the wheat plant's genes. Before domestication, wheat is a relatively rare plant growing in a small region. After domestication, wheat spreads across the entire world, becoming one of the most successful plants on Earth. Who domesticated whom? The same process occurs with animals. Wolves begin hanging around human settlements, scavenging scraps. The friendliest wolves, the ones most comfortable with humans, get the most food and produce the most offspring. Over thousands of years, these wolves become dogs, the first domesticated animal. Humans breed them for specific traits: hunting ability, guarding instinct, herding skills. Meanwhile, sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle undergo similar transformations. Wild aurochs, massive and aggressive animals standing 6 feet tall at the shoulder, become docile cattle. Wild boars become pigs. In each case, humans select for tameness, for animals that accept human authority and can be controlled. But domestication comes with unforeseen consequences. When you crowd animals together in pens and villages, diseases spread easily. Many of humanity's most devastating plagues originate from domesticated animals. Measles comes from cattle, flu from pigs and chickens, smallpox likely from cattle or horses. These diseases jump the species barrier, adapting to infect humans. Hunter-gatherers, living in small, scattered bands and having little contact with animals, rarely experience epidemics. Farmers, living in dense villages surrounded by livestock, become disease incubators. For thousands of years, this seems like a terrible price to pay for agriculture. But in the long run, it gives farming societies a devastating advantage. Populations that live with domesticated animals for generations develop some immunity to these diseases. When they later encounter people who lack this immunity, the results are catastrophic. This pattern will repeat throughout history, most dramatically when Europeans carrying smallpox and measles arrive in the Americas, where these diseases kill up to 90% of the indigenous population. By 7000 BCE, farming villages dot the landscape across the Fertile Crescent, spreading into Anatolia, the Caucasus, and Egypt. These settlements are still small by modern standards, rarely exceeding a few hundred people. But they represent a new way of living. Houses are built close together. Property lines matter. Grain must be stored for months, creating the concept of surplus and wealth. Some families have more land, more animals, more stored grain than others. Inequality emerges. Social hierarchies develop. The seeds of civilization are planted alongside the wheat and barley. Chapter 3. The first cities and writing around 4000 BCE. In the marshy lowlands of southern Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something unprecedented emerges from the mud and reeds. Cities. Not just large villages, but true cities with populations in the tens of thousands. Uruk, Ur, Eridu. Lagash names that echo through history as the world's first urban centers. These Sumerian cities represent a revolutionary leap in human organization. concentrating people and power in ways never before seen. The city of Uruk, at its height around 3000 BCE, covers nearly 1,000 acres and houses perhaps 50,000 people. To put this in perspective, until this moment in history, the largest human settlements rarely exceeded a few thousand individuals. Now, tens of thousands of people live, work, and cooperate within a few square miles. What makes this possible? The answer lies in the unique geography of Mesopotamia. The twin rivers flood annually, depositing rich silt that makes the soil incredibly fertile. But the floods are unpredictable and often destructive. Success requires irrigation systems, canals to direct water to fields, and massive cooperation to maintain these waterworks. No single family can dig and maintain the kilometers of canals needed. It requires coordinated labor from thousands of people. This necessity for large-scale cooperation creates the conditions for cities. And cities, once established, develop their own momentum. Craftsmen who specialize in pottery, metalworking, or weaving migrate to cities where customers abound. Merchants establish themselves to facilitate trade. Priests build temples that become centers of worship and economic power. Administrators emerge to organize labor and distribute resources. The Sumerian temple complexes are the heart of these first cities. The ziggurats, massive step pyramids, dominate the skyline. The White Temple at Uruk sits atop a ziggurat rising 40 feet above the surrounding plain, a gleaming beacon visible for miles across the flat Mesopotamian landscape. But temples are not just religious centers. They are economic powerhouses. The Temple of Inanna at Uruk owns vast estates, employs thousands of workers, and stores enormous quantities of grain, oil, and other goods. Temple administrators organize labor gangs to maintain irrigation canals, distribute food rations to workers, and coordinate trade with distant regions. In many ways, the temple functions as a primitive government, managing the city's economic life and providing social services. This administrative complexity creates a problem. How do you keep track of everything? How do you remember who owes what to whom? How do you record the temple's inventory of grain and livestock? How do you track taxes paid and rations distributed? Human memory has limits, especially when you're managing an economy involving thousands of people. The solution appears around 3200 BCE, writing. The Sumerians don't invent writing to record great literature or preserve history. They invent it for accounting. The first written documents are clay tablets impressed with symbols representing quantities of goods. A picture of a sheep means a sheep. A picture of a wheat stalk means grain. Simple marks indicate numbers. These aren't true writing yet, just pictographic symbols for record keeping. But over centuries, the system evolves. The pictographs become more abstract, transforming into cuneiform script, where combinations of wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay represent not just objects, but also sounds and abstract concepts. By 2500 BCE, Sumerian scribes can write anything they can say. They record laws, treaties, royal propaganda, religious texts, personal letters, and yes, literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, composed around 2100 BCE, is one of humanity's oldest surviving works of literature, telling the story of a king's quest for immortality. The invention of writing transforms civilization in ways the Sumerians never anticipate. Knowledge can now be preserved across generations without relying on human memory. A scribe in 2500 BCE can read documents written 500 years earlier. Ideas can spread across vast distances. A king can send detailed instructions to governors in distant provinces. Priests can standardize religious practices by distributing written liturgies. Laws can be codified and enforced uniformly. The Sumerian innovation of writing is so powerful that the basic idea spreads everywhere. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Indus Valley script, Chinese characters, Phoenician alphabet, All these writing systems are inspired directly or indirectly by the Sumerian achievement, though each culture develops its own unique approach. But cities bring problems along with opportunities. Warfare intensifies. When humans live in small scattered bands, conflict is limited. You might raid a neighboring camp, steal some goods, maybe kill a few people, but then everyone disperses. Cities are different. They represent concentrated wealth, stored grain, precious metals, thousands of people who can be enslaved. They are tempting targets, and they cannot easily flee. Cities need defenses, walls, gates, guards, armies. The first city walls appear at Uruk around 3000 BCE, massive fortifications enclosing the entire urban area. War becomes organized and systematic. Kings maintain standing armies. Bronze weapons and armor appear. Chariots revolutionize warfare around 2000 BCE. The city-states of Sumer spend as much time fighting each other as they do building civilization. Political organization grows more complex. Early Mesopotamian cities are probably governed by councils of elders and assemblies of citizens. But as warfare intensifies, military leaders accumulate power. Kings emerge, initially as war leaders, but gradually claiming divine authority. By 2500 BCE, Sumerian kings rule as absolute monarchs, commanding armies, directing construction projects, and claiming to be chosen by the gods. Ur-Nammu, king of Ur, around 2100 BCE, promulgates one of history's first law codes, establishing standardized punishments for crimes and attempting to regulate economic life. The code is remarkably sophisticated, distinguishing between intentional and accidental harm, providing protections for widows and orphans, and regulating marriage, inheritance, and property rights. The Mesopotamian achievement is staggering. In the span of about 2,000 years, from 4000 BC to 2000 BCE, the region transforms from scattered farming villages to a network of sophisticated city-states with complex governments, advanced technology, international trade networks, and written languages. They invent the wheel, develop bronze metallurgy, create mathematics and astronomy, brew beer, bake bread, and establish the first schools where young scribes learn their craft. The Mesopotamians don't solve all of humanity's problems. War, inequality, disease, and oppression remain constant companions. But they create the template for civilization that will spread across the world. After Mesopotamia, there's no going back to the simple farming village. Humanity has crossed a threshold. We are city builders now, and we will remain so for all time to come. Chapter 4. The Gift of the Nile. While Mesopotamia burst the world's first cities through struggle and constant warfare, a very different civilization emerges along the banks of the Nile River in Egypt. Around 3100 BCE, a king named Narmer, also known as Menes, unifies Upper and Lower Egypt into a single kingdom, stretching nearly 600 miles from the Mediterranean coast to the first cataract at Aswan. This unification creates one of history's longest-lasting and most stable civilizations, enduring for nearly 3,000 years with a cultural continuity that staggers the imagination. To put this in perspective, Cleopatra, who lives in the 1st century BCE, is closer in time to us than to the builders of the Great Pyramid. Egypt's success stems from its unique geography. The Nile is not like the unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates. It floods with reliable regularity every year, from July to October, depositing rich black silt that replenishes the soil. Egyptian farmers don't need complex irrigation systems. They simply wait for the flood to recede, plant their crops in the fertile mud, and harvest abundant yields. The Greek historian Herodotus calls Egypt the gift of the Nile, and he's absolutely right. The river provides everything: water, transportation, fertile soil, fish, papyrus reeds for making paper and boats, and a natural highway connecting the entire country. Beyond the narrow green strip along the river, the desert begins abruptly. This creates natural borders that protect Egypt from invasion and give the civilization a sense of security that Mesopotamian city-states never enjoy. The pharaohs rule as living gods, intermediaries between the human and divine realms. This is not mere propaganda. Egyptians genuinely believe their king is divine, the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon god. When the pharaoh dies, he becomes Osiris, lord of the underworld, and his son becomes the new Horus. This religious ideology justifies absolute monarchy and enables the pharaohs to mobilize enormous resources for projects that boggle the mind. The most famous of these projects is, of course, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Around 2560 BCE, Pharaoh Khufu commands the construction of his tomb. Over the next 20 years, workers quarry, transport, and precisely place approximately 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. The finished pyramid rises 481 feet, making it the tallest human-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. How is this possible with Bronze Age technology? Recent archaeology has shattered many myths. The pyramid builders are not slaves but paid workers, probably farmers doing labor service during the flood season when they can't work their fields. They live in workers' villages, receive rations of bread and beer, and take pride in their work. Graffiti left by work gangs boasts about their accomplishments. The Friends of Khufu gang and the Drunkards of Menkaure gang. These are not oppressed slaves, but citizens participating in a great national project. The logistics are mind-boggling. Quarries at Aswan, 500 miles south, provide the granite for the pyramid's inner chambers. Workers cut the massive stones using copper tools and wooden wedges. They load the stones onto barges during the flood season when the Nile reaches close to the pyramid site. Limestone for the outer casing comes from quarries on the east bank of the Nile, directly across from Giza. Workers cut channels from the river to the pyramid site, allowing boats to deliver stones almost to the construction area. Ramps, probably built in a spiral around the rising pyramid, allow workers to drag stones to ever higher levels using wooden sledges and perhaps rollers. Experiments suggest that wetting the sand in front of sledges reduces friction dramatically. The precision is astonishing. The base of the pyramid is level to within 2 centimeters over a distance of 230 meters. The sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. But Egypt is far more than pyramids. The civilization develops a sophisticated writing system, hieroglyphics, which combines pictographic and phonetic elements. Unlike Mesopotamian cuneiform, which eventually becomes a purely phonetic script, hieroglyphics retain their visual beauty throughout Egyptian history. Scribes paint and carve these elegant symbols on temple walls, tomb chambers, and papyrus scrolls. The Egyptians are prolific record keepers, documenting everything from royal conquests to legal disputes to love poetry. They develop advanced mathematics, able to calculate areas and volumes necessary for construction and taxation. They create a 365-day solar calendar, recognizing that the Nile's flood correlates with the heliacal rising of Sirius, the dog star. Their medical knowledge is surprisingly advanced. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE, but copying material from much earlier, describes 48 medical cases, including skull fractures, spinal injuries, and breast tumors, offering rational diagnoses and treatments devoid of magical thinking. Egyptian religion is complex and sometimes contradictory. They worship hundreds of gods, each associated with natural forces, cities, or aspects of life. Ra, the sun god, sails across the sky each day and through the underworld each night. Osiris judges the dead, weighing their hearts against the feather of truth. Isis, the devoted wife and mother, possesses powerful magic. Thoth, the ibis-headed god, invents writing and keeps records. The Egyptians believe in an afterlife that mirrors earthly existence, which explains their elaborate burial practices. The wealthy prepare extensively for death, mummifying their bodies to preserve them for eternity, filling their tombs with food, furniture, clothes, and treasures they'll need in the next world. The Book of the Dead provides spells and instructions for navigating the dangerous journey through the underworld. Egypt's stability is not unbroken. The Old Kingdom, the age of the Great Pyramids, collapses around 2200 BCE into the chaos of the First Intermediate Period, probably triggered by climate change and crop failures. Central authority disintegrates. Local governors become independent warlords. Famine and civil war ravage the land. Egyptian texts from this period lament that the land turns around like a potter's S-wheel, and nobles are in distress, while the poor man is full of joy. But around 2055 BCE, a new dynasty reunifies the country, beginning the Middle Kingdom. This pattern of collapse and renewal will repeat through Egyptian history. Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, each separated by periods of fragmentation, but each maintaining recognizable cultural continuity with what came before. During the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1077 BCE, Egypt reaches the height of its imperial power. Pharaohs like Thutmose III and Ramesses II lead armies into Syria and Palestine, creating an empire that rivals the great powers of the age. Enormous temples rise at Karnak and Luxor. The Valley of the Kings becomes the royal necropolis, with tombs carved deep into the mountainside. This is the Egypt of popular imagination, powerful, wealthy, magnificent. Yet even at its peak, Egyptian civilization retains the conservative values that have sustained it for millennia. Change happens slowly. Traditions are revered. The past is honored. This conservatism is both Egypt's strength and ultimately its limitation, allowing it to endure for 3,000 years, but also making it difficult to adapt when the world around it transforms beyond recognition. Chapter 5: Bronze Age Empires and the Indus Valley. While Egypt and Mesopotamia dominate historical attention, the Bronze Age world is far more connected and complex than often imagined. By 2000 BCE, a vast trading network links civilizations across the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and beyond. This is the first truly international age, where tin from Afghanistan, copper from Cyprus, silver from Anatolia, gold from Nubia, and lapis lazuli from Central Asia move along trade routes spanning thousands of miles. Ships sail the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, carrying goods, ideas, and technologies. Merchants and diplomats travel between courts. Kings correspond with each other in Akkadian, the international language of diplomacy. The Bronze Age is globalized in ways that won't be seen again until the modern era. Several major powers dominate this interconnected world. The Hittites built an empire in Anatolia, modern Turkey, with their capital at Hattusa. They are the first civilization to master ironworking on a large scale, though they guard the technology jealously. Hittite kings correspond as equals with Egyptian pharaohs, sometimes as allies, sometimes as rivals. Around 1274 BCE, Pharaoh Ramesses II and Hittite king Muwatalli II fight the Battle of Kadesh in Syria, one of the largest chariot battles in history. Though both sides claim victory, the battle ends inconclusively, and eventually, the two powers sign a peace treaty. This treaty, preserved in both Egyptian hieroglyphics and Hittite cuneiform, is one of the earliest international agreements in history. The Minoans, based on Crete, create a sophisticated maritime civilization. Their palace at Knossos is a sprawling complex covering 150,000 square feet, with advanced plumbing, colorful frescoes depicting dolphins and acrobats, and vast storage rooms for oil and grain. Minoan ships dominate eastern Mediterranean trade. Their culture seems remarkably peaceful, with little evidence of warfare or fortifications. Women appear to hold high status, depicted prominently in religious ceremonies. Around 1450 BCE, however, Minoan civilization collapses suddenly, possibly due to volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, or conquest by the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. The Mycenaeans are warriors and traders who inherit the Minoan trading network. They build massive fortified citadels at Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, with walls so thick that later Greeks believed they were built by giants. They developed Linear B script, the earliest written Greek. Mycenaean kings rule from palace complexes that serve as administrative and economic centers, controlling vast estates and directing craftsmen who produce pottery, weapons, and luxury goods. Around 1200 BCE, the Mycenaeans may have launched the expedition against Troy, immortalized in Homer's Iliad, though separating historical fact from epic legend proves impossible. Far to the east, along the Indus River in modern Pakistan and northwest India, another sophisticated civilization flourishes in almost complete historical obscurity. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization after its major city Harappa, thrives from approximately 2600 to 1900 BCE. At its peak, it covers an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, encompassing perhaps 5 million people across hundreds of settlements. Yet we know frustratingly little about these people because their writing system remains undeciphered. We can see their cities, touch their artifacts, map their trade routes, but we cannot read their words or know their stories. What we can see is remarkable. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, the two largest cities, are masterpieces of urban planning. Streets run in grid patterns. Houses are built from standardized fired bricks. Advanced drainage systems channel wastewater away from residences. Many houses have private wells and bathrooms with sophisticated plumbing. The cities show little evidence of palaces or temples, suggesting a more egalitarian society than Mesopotamia or Egypt, though this interpretation is debated. The Indus people manufacture beautiful pottery, craft jewelry from precious stones, and produce copper and bronze tools. They trade extensively with Mesopotamia. Harappan seals have been found in Sumerian cities, and Sumerian records mention trade with Malaha, probably referring to the Indus region. Around 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization declines mysteriously. Cities are gradually abandoned. The population disperses. Climate change may be responsible. The Dadar-Hakra River, which once flowed parallel to the Indus and supported many settlements, dries up, possibly due to tectonic activity altering its course. Without adequate water, cities become unsustainable. The people migrate. Their urban civilization ends, but they don't disappear. They become the ancestors of later Indian populations, carrying forward cultural traditions that eventually merge with those of Indo-Aryan peoples migrating into the region from Central Asia. Around 1200 BCE, the entire Bronze Age world system collapses in a cascading catastrophe that historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse. Within a span of about 50 years, almost every major civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East is destroyed or severely damaged. The Hittite Empire falls completely, its capital burned and abandoned. Mycenaean Greece collapses into a dark age. City after city throughout the Levant is destroyed. Egypt survives, but is severely weakened, losing its Asian empire forever. Ugarit, a prosperous trading city in Syria, is burned so completely that it is never rebuilt. A letter found in the ruins captures the desperation. "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. What causes this catastrophe?" Ancient Egyptian texts blame the Sea Peoples, mysterious invaders from the north who attack by both land and sea. But this explanation is probably too simple. The collapse likely results from multiple interconnected factors. Climate change causing drought and famine, Earthquakes destroying cities, internal rebellions, systems collapse when trade networks fail, and yes, migrations and invasions taking advantage of the chaos. The Bronze Age world is so interconnected that when one part fails, the entire system unravels. When trade stops, cities that depend on imported tin to make bronze cannot produce weapons or tools. When governments collapse, the administrative systems that organize irrigation and food distribution break down. Famine leads to migration. Migration leads to conflict. Conflict destroys more cities, further disrupting trade. It's a death spiral from which the Bronze Age never recovers. But from the ashes of this collapse, new civilizations will eventually emerge, transformed and in some ways stronger than before. Chapter 6. The Age of Iron and Empires. From the ruins of the Bronze Age collapse, the world slowly rebuilds, but it rebuilds differently. Iron replaces bronze as the metal of choice for tools and weapons. This shift is revolutionary. Bronze requires both copper and tin, which are rare and often found in different regions, necessitating long-distance trade and making bronze expensive. Iron ore, by contrast, is abundant almost everywhere. Once ironworking technology spreads, any region can produce its own metal tools and weapons. This democratizes military power and enables the rise of new peoples who were marginal in the Bronze Age. The first major empire of the Peorespedy Iron Age emerges in northern Mesopotamia. The Assyrians, fierce warriors from the city of Ashur, begin expanding aggressively around 911 BCE under King Adad-nirari II. Over the next 3 centuries, Assyrian kings conquer a vast empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to Egypt, from Anatolia to western Iran. The Assyrians are masters of siege warfare, developing sophisticated techniques for breaching city walls, battering rams, siege towers, tunneling, and psychological warfare. They deport conquered populations to prevent rebellion, forcibly moving entire cities from one end of the empire to the other. These deportations mix populations and destroy local identities, making resistance more difficult. Assyrian kings are not subtle about their brutality. Raw inscriptions boast of cities destroyed, populations massacred, and enemies impaled or flayed alive. King Ashurnasirpal II declares, "I cut off their heads and formed them into pillars. I burned their adolescent boys and girls." This is deliberate terror, designed to make enemies surrender without fighting rather than face the consequences of resistance. Yet the Assyrians are more than mere destroyers. They build magnificent cities. Nineveh, their final capital, is one of the ancient world's great metropolises, covering 1,800 acres and housing perhaps 120,000 people. King Ashurbanipal creates a vast library at Nineveh, collecting thousands of cuneiform tablets from across Mesopotamia, including the Epic of Gilgamesh and much of what we know about Mesopotamian literature and science. But Assyrian brutality eventually becomes their undoing. The conquered peoples hate their oppressors and await any opportunity for revenge. When Assyria weakens, they strike. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes besieges Nineveh. The great city falls after a 3-month siege. The victors show no mercy. They destroy Nineveh so thoroughly that it disappears from history, its location unknown until archaeologists rediscover it in the 19th century CE. The Assyrian Empire, which had seemed invincible, vanishes almost overnight. This demonstrates a harsh truth about empires built on terror. They endure only as long as their military might remains overwhelming. The Neo-Babylonian Empire rises from Assyria's ashes. King Nebuchadnezzar II, 605 to 562 BCE, transforms Babylon into perhaps the world's most magnificent city. He constructs the Ishtar Gate, decorated with glazed blue bricks and golden animals. He builds the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a multi-terraced paradise of trees and flowers rising above the Mesopotamian plain. though some historians debate whether they exist at all. In 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar's armies destroyed Jerusalem, demolished Solomon's temple, and deport the Jewish elite to Babylon. This Babylonian captivity profoundly shapes Jewish identity and biblical literature. Many books of the Hebrew Bible are written or edited during this period of exile. Meanwhile, on the Iranian plateau, a new power emerges that will transform the ancient world. The Persians, led by Cyrus the Great, rebel against their Median overlords around 550 BCE. Cyrus proves to be a military genius and a shrewd politician. He conquers the Median Empire, then turns west to defeat King Croesus of Lydia, famous for his wealth. In 539 BCE, Cyrus conquers Babylon without a fight. The city gates open, and Persian forces march in peacefully. Cyrus presents himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror. He frees the Jewish exiles, allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. He respects local customs and religions. The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay document proclaiming his policies, is sometimes called the first declaration of human rights, though this interpretation is debated. Cyrus's son Cambyses conquers Egypt, and his successor Darius I expands the empire to its greatest extent. By 500 BCE, the Persian Empire is the largest the world has ever seen, stretching from Greece to India, from Egypt to Central Asia. It encompasses dozens of different peoples, languages, and religions. Governing such a vast realm requires administrative innovations. Darius divides the empire into provinces called satrapies, each governed by a satrap who collects taxes and maintains order, but operates with considerable autonomy. The famous Royal Road runs 1,600 miles from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia, allowing royal messengers to travel the distance in just 7 days using a relay system of fresh horses. Darius standardizes coinage and establishes a uniform legal code. He promotes Zoroastrianism, one of the world's first monotheistic religions, though he tolerates other faiths. Far to the east, similar transformations are occurring. In northern India, small kingdoms consolidate into larger states. Around 544 BCE, in one of these kingdoms, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama abandons his comfortable life to seek spiritual enlightenment. After years of meditation, he achieves nirvana and becomes the Buddha, the awakened one. His teachings about suffering, desire, and the path to liberation attract followers throughout India and will eventually spread across Asia, becoming one of the world's great religions. Around the same time, Mahavira establishes Jainism, another major Indian religion emphasizing non-violence and asceticism. In China, the Zhou dynasty, which has ruled since 1046 BCE, gradually loses control. By 475 BCE, China enters the Warring States period, with 7 major kingdoms fighting for supremacy. This era of chaos is also a golden age of Chinese philosophy. Confucius, 551 to 479 BCE, teaches a philosophy of social harmony based on proper relationships, filial piety, and moral leadership. His rival Mozi advocates universal love and condemns warfare. Laozi, probably a legendary figure rather than a historical person, is credited with founding Taoism, which teaches harmony with the Tao, the fundamental principle underlying the universe. These competing philosophies address the central question of the age: how can order be restored to a chaotic world? The answers they provide will shape Chinese civilization for millennia. The Iron Age is an era of both tremendous violence and remarkable cultural achievement. Empires rise and fall with astonishing speed. But the legacy they leave in philosophy, religion, literature, and political organization will outlast their military conquests. The Persian Empire demonstrates that diverse peoples can coexist under a single government if treated justly. The Buddha and Confucius show that human wisdom can address suffering and social disorder. The age of Bronze Age kingdoms is over. The age of vast multicultural empires and universal philosophies has begun. Chapter 7. Classical Greece and democracy's birth while empires dominate the Near East. A very different political experiment is unfolding in the rocky peninsulas and islands of Greece. Here, geography determines destiny. Greece is not a unified realm, but a landscape fragmented by mountains and sea. Valleys are isolated from each other. Islands dot the Aegean. Travel by water is easier than by land. This geography prevents any single power from easily dominating the region and leads to the development of hundreds of independent city-states, each fiercely proud of its autonomy. These city-states, or poleis, become laboratories for political experimentation. And in Athens, one of these experiments produces something unprecedented in human history: democracy. Athens in the 6th century BCE is not a democracy yet. Like most Greek city-states, it's ruled by aristocrats who dominate government and own most of the land. Poor farmers fall into debt and sometimes into slavery. Social tensions are reaching a breaking point. In 594 BCE, the Athenians appoint a respected aristocrat named Solon to reform the constitution and prevent civil war. Solon's reforms are revolutionary. He cancels debts, frees those enslaved for debt, and prohibits future debt slavery. He reorganizes society based on wealth rather than birth, allowing even wealthy commoners to hold high office. He creates a people's court where any citizen can bring charges. These reforms don't satisfy everyone. The poor want land redistribution. The rich resent losing privileges, but they prevent immediate collapse. Democracy truly arrives in 508 BCE, when Cleisthenes, after winning a power struggle, introduces radical reforms. He reorganizes Athens' tribes to break up traditional power bases, creates a council of 500 selected by lot to prepare legislation, and establishes the assembly where any male citizen can speak and vote on laws and policies. This is not democracy as we know it today. Women, slaves, and foreign residents have no political rights. But for male citizens, it's extraordinarily democratic. Whether you're a wealthy aristocrat or a poor farmer, you have an equal vote in the assembly. You can be selected by lot to serve on the council. You can speak your mind on any issue. Political decisions are made by the people, not imposed from above. This democratic experiment coincides with an existential threat. The Persian Empire, having conquered the Greek cities of Ionia on the Anatolian coast, turns its attention to mainland Greece. In 490 BCE, King Darius sends an invasion force across the Aegean. The Persians land at Marathon, about 25 miles from Athens. The situation seems hopeless. The Persian army vastly outnumbers the Athenians. But the Athenian general Miltiades makes a bold decision. He orders his hoplites, heavily armed citizen soldiers, to charge at a run across the plain. The tactic works brilliantly. The Greeks smash through the lightly armored Persian center, then wheel around to attack the wings. The Persians flee to their ships, having lost thousands of men. The Greeks lose only 192. A messenger runs the 25 miles to Athens to announce the victory, gives his message, and then dies from exhaustion, the origin of the Marathon race. The victory at Marathon is temporary. Darius' son Xerxes returns in 480 BCE with a massive invasion force, perhaps 200,000 soldiers and 600 ships, intent on conquering all of Greece. The Greek city-states, despite their usual squabbling, unite against the common threat. Sparta's King Leonidas leads 300 Spartans and a few thousand other Greeks to hold the pass at Thermopylae while the rest of Greece prepares. For 3 days, the Greeks hold against impossible odds. Finally, a traitor shows the Persians a mountain path that allows them to outflank the defenders. Leonidas sends most of the army away, but stays with his 300 Spartans to fight to the death, buying time for the Greek retreat. All are killed, but their sacrifice becomes legendary. The Persians push south, burning Athens, whose inhabitants have evacuated to nearby islands. But the Athenian leader Themistocles has a plan. He spent the previous years building a massive fleet of triremes, swift warships powered by 3 banks of oars. Now he lures the Persian fleet into the narrow straits at Salamis. The Persian ships are too numerous for the confined space and cannot maneuver. The Greek triremes ram and sink them one after another. Xerxes, watching from a throne on shore, sees his fleet destroyed. The following year, Greek hoplites crush the remaining Persian army at Plataea. The invasion is over. Greece is saved. The victory propels Athens to greatness. The city becomes the leader of a naval alliance, the Delian League, which gradually transforms into an Athenian empire. Tribute flows into Athens from across the Aegean. The city uses this wealth to rebuild on an unprecedented scale. Under the leadership of Pericles, Athens enters its golden age. The Parthenon rises on the Acropolis, a temple to Athena that embodies the perfection of classical architecture. The theater of Dionysus hosts the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, exploring themes of fate, justice, and human nature that still resonate today. The comedies of Aristophanes satirize politicians and social conventions with a freedom of speech that would be dangerous in any other ancient society. Athens becomes the intellectual center of Greece. Philosophers gather in the Agora to debate fundamental questions. What is justice? What is the good life? How should society be organized? Socrates wanders the streets, questioning everyone he meets, demolishing false certainties and exposing ignorance, including his own. He claims to know nothing, but his method of questioning, the Socratic method, becomes one of history's most influential teaching techniques. His student Plato writes dialogues exploring philosophy, politics, and metaphysics. Plato's student Aristotle studies everything from biology to ethics to politics, attempting to systematize all human knowledge. The historian Herodotus writes the first true history, investigating the causes of the Persian Wars. His successor Thucydides, chronicling the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, applies rigorous standards of evidence and analysis that make him the father of scientific history. But Athens' democracy has a dark side. The empire it builds is not based on consent. Allied cities that try to leave are brutally punished. In 416 BCE, the Athenians besiege the island of Melos, which wants to remain neutral in Athens' war with Sparta. The Athenians demand submission. When the Melians refuse, Athens conquers the island, kills all adult males, and enslaves the women and children. Thucydides records the Melians pleading for justice and the Athenians responding, "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must." This is the reality of Athenian power, hidden beneath the rhetoric of freedom and democracy. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta drags on for 27 years. From 431 to 404 BCE, it's a catastrophe for Greece. The Athenian fleet is eventually destroyed. Athens surrenders. Sparta becomes the dominant power, but proves incapable of leadership. The Greek city-states exhaust themselves in endless warfare. Democracy at Athens survives, but is weakened. In 399 BCE, Athens tries and executes Socrates on charges of corrupting the youth and impiety. The execution of the wisest man in Greece symbolizes the city's declining confidence in its own ideals. Yet even as Greek political power wanes, Greek culture spreads across the Mediterranean. Greek philosophy, art, architecture, and literature become the foundation of Western civilization. The experiment that began in a small city-state on the edge of the known world will influence human thought for thousands of years to come. Chapter 8. Alexander and the Hellenistic World in 356 BCE. A child is born in Pella, the capital of Macedon, a kingdom on the northern fringes of the Greek world. His father is King Philip II, a brilliant military reformer and ambitious conqueror. His mother is Olympias, a passionate woman who claims descent from Achilles. The child is Alexander. His birth is accompanied by omens. On the day he is born, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the world, burns to the ground. Ancient writers interpret this as a sign that a destroyer of kingdoms has entered the world. They are not wrong. Philip II transforms Macedon from a backward kingdom into the dominant military power in Greece. He reorganizes the army, creating the famous Macedonian phalanx, a formation of infantry armed with 18-foot pikes, advancing in an unstoppable block bristling with spear points. He conquers or coerces the Greek city-states into joining his League of Corinth, ending their independence while claiming to prepare a united Greek campaign against Persia. In 336 BCE, just as the Persian invasion is about to begin, Philip is assassinated at his daughter's wedding. Alexander, only 20 years old, becomes king. Many expect the young king to fail. Several Greek cities rebel, assuming Macedon's power will collapse. They are catastrophically wrong. Alexander marches south with terrifying speed. When the city of Thebes revolts, he makes an example of it. His army storms the city, kills 6,000 inhabitants, and sells the remaining 30,000 into slavery. The city is razed to the ground, with only the temples and the house of the poet Pindar spared. It is a brutal message: submit or be destroyed. The Greek cities submit. In 334 BCE, Alexander crosses into Asia with an army of about 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. He's embarking on a conquest that will take him to the edges of the known world. Near the city of Troy, Alexander visits the tomb of Achilles, his legendary ancestor. He makes sacrifices to the ancient hero, perhaps sensing that, like Achilles, he is destined for glory and an early death. The first major battle comes at the Granicus River. The Persians make a stand on the opposite bank. Alexander personally leads the cavalry charge across the river, his white plume making him an obvious target. He's almost killed but fights through and routs the Persians. Asia Minor lies open before him. The Persian king Darius III assembles a massive army to crush this Greek upstart. They meet at Issus in 333 BCE. Darius has perhaps 100,000 men. Alexander has maybe 40,000, but Alexander is a tactical genius. He identifies a weakness in the Persian line and leads his companion cavalry in a devastating charge directly at Darius. The Persian king panics and flees. His army disintegrates. Alexander captures Darius's tent, his family, and his treasury. The great king of Persia has run from a 22-year-old Macedonian. The psychological impact is immense. Alexander marched south into Egypt, which welcomes him as a liberator from Persian rule. The Egyptian priests declare him pharaoh and son of the god, Amun. Alexander takes this seriously, perhaps even believing in his own divinity. He founds the city of Alexandria at the mouth of the Nile. It will become one of the ancient world's greatest cities, a center of learning, commerce, and culture. But Alexander doesn't linger. He returns to face Darius one final time. The armies meet at Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Darius has assembled a truly massive force, possibly 250,000 men, including scythe chariots and war elephants. But Alexander cannot stop. He pushes east into Central Asia, fighting brutal campaigns against nomadic tribes in what is now Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. The fighting is savage, the terrain hostile. His men are exhausted, but Alexander drives them onward. He crosses the Hindu Kush Mountains into India. There, he defeats King Paris at the Battle of the Hydaspes River in 326 BCE, despite facing war elephants that terrify his horses. After the battle, Alexander is so impressed by Paris's courage that he not only returns his kingdom but adds territory to it. Alexander wants to continue east to reach the ends of the earth, but at the Hyphasis River, his army finally refuses. They've been marching for 8 years, fought countless battles, and traveled thousands of miles from home. They want to go back. Even Alexander cannot overcome this. He turns back, though he's clearly furious. The return journey is a nightmare. Alexander divides his forces, leading one group through the Gedrosian Desert in southern Iran, one of the harshest environments on Earth. Thousands die of thirst and heat. It is perhaps Alexander's greatest defeat, inflicted not by an enemy but by nature. Alexander reaches Babylon in 323 BCE and begins planning new conquests: Arabia, Carthage, perhaps Italy. But in June, after a night of heavy drinking, he falls ill with a fever. For 10 days, he grows progressively worse. On June 10th, 323 BCE, Alexander the Great dies. He is 32 years old. He has conquered the largest empire the world has ever seen, never lost a battle, and changed history forever. On his deathbed, when asked who should succeed him, he reportedly says, "To the strongest." It is a prescription for chaos. Alexander's empire immediately fragments. His generals, the Diadochi or successors, fight a series of brutal wars lasting 4 decades. Eventually, the empire stabilizes into several Hellenistic kingdoms: the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Syria and Persia, the Antigonid kingdom in Macedon, and smaller states like Pergamon and the Greco-Bactrian kingdom in Central Asia. These kingdoms are Greek-ruled, but culturally mixed. Greek becomes the common language of the educated elite from Sicily to India. Greek architectural styles, artistic forms, and philosophical ideas spread across the ancient world. In Alexandria, the Ptolemies built the great library and the museum, attracting scholars from everywhere. The mathematician Euclid writes his elements there. Eratosthenes calculates the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy. This Hellenistic world is cosmopolitan, cultured, and wealthy, a fusion of Greek and Eastern civilizations that Alexander's conquests made possible. Chapter 9. The Rise of Rome. While Alexander conquers the East, a city on the banks of the Tiber River in central Italy is beginning its own improbable rise to power. According to legend, Rome is founded in 753 BC.E. by Romulus, who kills his twin brother Remus in a dispute over where to build the city. The legend is probably false, but it captures something true about Roman character: ambition, ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. In reality, Rome begins as a collection of hilltop villages inhabited by Latin-speaking farmers. It's an unremarkable place, seemingly destined for obscurity. Yet within 500 years, Rome will rule the entire Mediterranean world. Early Rome is ruled by kings, though we know little about them. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, is reportedly a tyrant. In 509 BCE, the Roman aristocrats overthrow him and establish a republic. Republic comes from res publica, the public thing. Power no longer belongs to one man but to the people, or at least to the male citizens. In practice, the Roman Republic is dominated by the aristocracy, the patricians, but the common people, the plebeians, have their own assembly and their own officials, the tribunes, who can veto Senate decisions. This creates a balance of power, though often an unstable one. The Roman constitution is complex and constantly evolving, but its central principle is that no one person should hold absolute power for long. Rome's early history is a constant struggle for survival. The city fights endless wars with its Italian neighbors: Etruscans, Knights, Latins, Gauls. In 390 BCE, a Gallic army sacks Rome, burning everything except the fortified capital. The Romans pay a ransom to get rid of the invaders, a humiliation they never forget. But Rome survives and grows stronger from each crisis. The secret of Roman success is not superior technology or wealth, but social organization and determination. Rome treats defeated enemies with a mix of severity and generosity. Some become Roman citizens with full rights. Others become allies with autonomy, but obligations to provide troops for Roman wars. This creates a pyramid of loyalty with Rome at the apex, commanding ever larger armies as the city's power grows. By 264 BCE, Rome dominates Italy. Then it collides with another rising power, Carthage, a wealthy trading city on the North African coast, founded by Phoenicians centuries earlier. Carthage controls Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, parts of Spain, and much of North Africa. Its navy dominates the Western Mediterranean. The conflict between Rome and Carthage produces 3 Punic Wars spanning more than a century. The First War 264–241 BCE is fought primarily at sea. The Romans, traditionally a land power, build a fleet from scratch and somehow defeat Carthage, a superior navy, through sheer determination and innovative tactics like the corvus, a boarding bridge that turns naval battles into infantry fights where Roman soldiers excel. The Second Punic War, 218–201 BCE, nearly destroys Rome. Carthage's brilliant general Hannibal Barca leads an army from Spain over the Alps into Italy, bringing war elephants through mountain passes, losing many men and most of the elephants but achieving complete strategic surprise. For the next 15 years, Hannibal ravages Italy, destroying Roman armies again and again. At Cannae, in 216 BCE, he achieves what is still considered the perfect tactical victory, enveloping and annihilating a Roman army twice the size of his own. Between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans die in a single day, the worst defeat in Roman history. Many Italian cities defect to Hannibal, believing Rome is finished. But Rome refuses to surrender. The Senate declares that any discussion of peace will be punished by death. They raise new armies to replace those destroyed. They adopt a strategy of avoiding major battles while gradually wearing down Hannibal's forces. Meanwhile, the Roman general Scipio takes the war to Spain, conquering Carthage's territories there, then invades North Africa itself. Hannibal is finally recalled to defend Carthage. Scipio defeats him at Zama in 202 BCE. Carthage sues for peace, losing its empire and becoming a Roman client state. Hannibal eventually flees into exile and later commits suicide rather than be captured by the Romans. The Second Punic War makes Rome the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War, 149–146 BC, is really just an execution. Carthage has recovered economically but poses no military threat. Still, influential Romans like Cato the Elder demand its destruction, ending every speech with "Carthage must be destroyed." Rome picks a fight, besieges the city for 3 years, finally breaches the walls, and spends 6 days fighting from house to house. When it's over, 50,000 survivors are sold into slavery. The city is burned so thoroughly that almost nothing remains. According to legend, the Romans sow salt into the earth so nothing will grow there again, though this story is probably false. What's true is that Rome completely and deliberately erases a rival civilization. The message is clear: Rome tolerates no equals. While fighting Carthage, Rome expands eastward, conquering the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged from Alexander's empire. The Macedonians, Seleucids, and Ptolemies are wealthy and cultured, but militarily outmatched. The Macedonian phalanx, invincible in Alexander's time, cannot stand against the flexible Roman legions. By 30 BCE, Rome controls the entire Mediterranean basin. The Romans call it Mare Nostrum, our sea. An Italian republic built by farmers has become a world empire. But the republic cannot handle its own success. Conquering the Mediterranean brings enormous wealth, but it flows mainly to senators and generals, not ordinary citizens. Small farmers, the backbone of the republic, are driven off their land by competition from slave plantations. They migrate to Rome, forming an urban poor dependent on state grain distributions and easily swayed by ambitious politicians. The republic's political system, designed for a city-state, breaks down under the strain of governing an empire. Military strongmen emerge who command the loyalty of their legions more than the state. The final century of the Republic is a death spiral of civil wars, dictatorships, and political murders. The crisis comes to a head with Julius Caesar. Born into an aristocratic family in 100 BCE, Caesar is ambitious, brilliant, and unscrupulous. He forms a political alliance with Pompey, Rome's greatest general, and Crassus, Rome's richest man. This first triumvirate dominates Roman politics. Caesar becomes governor of Gaul and spends 8 years conquering all of modern France, Belgium, and parts of Germany, writing vivid accounts of his campaigns that make him famous throughout Rome. His legions are devoted to him personally. He leads them across the Rhine and even briefly into Britain, becoming the first Roman to set foot on that mysterious island. But success makes Caesar's former ally Pompey jealous and fearful. The Senate, also afraid of Caesar's power and popularity, orders him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen to face prosecution. Caesar knows this means his death or exile. In January 49 BCE, he makes his decision. He crosses the Rubicon River, the border between his province and Italy proper, with a single legion. The die is cast, he supposedly declares. By crossing with an army, he commits treason and starts a civil war. But he gambles that his veterans, his popularity, and his military genius will triumph. He's right. Pompey and the Senate flee to Greece. Caesar follows, defeats them at Pharsalus in 48 BCE, and pursues Pompey to Egypt, where Pompey is murdered by the boy king Ptolemy XIII, who hopes to curry favor with the victor. Caesar becomes dictator of Rome, holding powers that violate every republican principle. He plans vast reforms: calendar reform, infrastructure projects, colonial foundations, and possibly an invasion of Parthia to match Alexander's conquests. But many senators see him as a tyrant destroying the Republic. On March 5, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius surround Caesar in the Senate chamber and stab him 23 times. Caesar falls at the base of Pompey's statue, dying in a pool of blood. His assassins believe they have saved the Republic. They are catastrophically wrong. Caesar's assassination triggers yet another civil war, even more destructive than the last, that will finally kill the Republic the assassins tried to save. Chapter 10. Augustus and the Roman Empire. Julius, Caesar's adopted son and heir, is his 18-year-old great-nephew Octavian. When news of Caesar's assassination reaches him, Octavian is studying in Greece. He immediately returns to Italy to claim his inheritance, though almost everyone expects him to fail. He is young, inexperienced, and sickly. Caesar's most powerful lieutenant, Mark Antony, treats him with contempt. The assassins dismiss him. They all underestimate him catastrophically. Octavian possesses a cold political intelligence and ruthless determination that makes him perhaps the most effective politician in Roman history. Over the next 14 years, he will outmaneuver, outlast, or destroy every rival until he stands alone as master of the Roman world. First, Octavian makes a surprising alliance with Mark Antony and Lepidus, forming the Second Triumvirate. Together they hunt down Caesar's assassins. Brutus and Cassius raise armies in the east, but Antony and Octavian defeat them at Philippi in 42 BCE. Both assassins commit suicide. With the Caesarians victorious, the triumvirs divide the Roman world among themselves. Octavian takes the west, Antony the east, Lepidus gets Africa. For a few years, an uneasy peace holds, but everyone knows the triumvirate cannot last. The question is, who will emerge supreme? Octavian systematically outmaneuvers his rivals. He forces Lepidus into retirement, taking his territories. Then he turns his propaganda machine against Mark Antony. This is easier than it should be, because Antony makes critical mistakes. He falls in love with Cleopatra VII, the brilliant and beautiful Ptolemaic queen of Egypt. Their romance is genuine, but it's also a political alliance. Cleopatra has wealth and grain. Antony has legions. Together they could rule the East. But Octavian portrays the relationship as un-Roman, claiming Antony has abandoned Roman values and become an Oriental despot under the spell of a foreign seductress. He reads to the Senate what he claims is Antony's will, stating he wishes to be buried in Egypt with Cleopatra. Romans are scandalized. Octavian gets the Senate to declare war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra, framing the conflict as Rome versus the decadent East. The final confrontation comes at Actium, off the coast of Greece, in 31 BC. Antony and Cleopatra command a fleet of about 230 warships and an army on shore. Octavian, with his Admiral Agrippa, has about 400 smaller, more maneuverable ships. The battle is decisive not because of superior tactics, but because Antony and Cleopatra's fleet loses morale. Many ships defect or refuse to fight. Seeing the battle lost, Cleopatra's ships break through and flee to Egypt. Antony follows, abandoning his fleet and army. It's a disaster. Octavian pursues them to Alexandria. In July 30th BCE, with Octavian's forces entering the city, Antony commits suicide, dying in Cleopatra's arms. Cleopatra tries to negotiate with Octavian, but realizes he plans to parade her in his triumph as a captive. Rather than face that humiliation, she commits suicide, probably by poison rather than the famous ass bite. Egypt becomes a Roman province. Octavian stands alone as master of the Roman world. But Octavian learns from Caesar's mistake. He does not call himself king or dictator. Instead, he claims to be restoring the Republic. In 27 BCE, he theatrically offers to give up his powers and return to private life. The Senate, full of his supporters, begs him to continue serving Rome. They grant him a new title, Augustus, meaning revered one. He is now Caesar Augustus. He keeps republican forms. The Senate still meets, magistrates are still elected, and Augustus holds offices like consul and tribune. But behind the facade, he controls everything. He commands all the armies. He appoints governors. He sets policy. The Republic is dead, replaced by what historians call the Principate, the rule of the princeps, the first citizen. Rome is now an empire ruled by an emperor, though Augustus never uses that word. Augustus rules for 41 years, from 27 BCE to 14 CE, a period of relative peace after decades of civil war. He reorganizes the army, making it professional with fixed terms of service and retirement benefits. He establishes the Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor. He begins the extensive road system that will eventually connect the entire empire. He beautifies Rome with marble temples and public buildings, famously claiming he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He promotes traditional Roman values: duty, piety, family. He passes laws to encourage marriage and childbearing among the upper classes. He patronizes poets like Virgil, whose Aeneid tells Rome's foundation story and glorifies Augustus's rule, and Horace, whose odes celebrate peace and traditional values. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, begins with Augustus. For the next 2 centuries, the Mediterranean world experiences unprecedented stability and prosperity. Trade flourishes, cities grow, the population increases. Roman engineering produces aqueducts, roads, bridges, and buildings that amaze even today. Roman law develops sophisticated principles of justice that influence legal systems for millennia. The empire reaches its greatest extent under Trajan, 98 to 117 CE, stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine and Danube to the Sahara. About 60 million people live under Roman rule, perhaps 1/5 of the world's population. But the empire has deep problems. The succession system is unstable. Augustus dies peacefully and is succeeded by his adopted son Tiberius, but many later emperors are assassinated or die in civil wars. The mad Emperor Caligula is stabbed to death by his own guards in 41 CE. Nero, who allegedly plays his lyre while Rome burns in 64 CE, commits suicide in 68 CE as his enemies close in. The Year of the Four Emperors in 69 CE sees multiple claimants fighting for the throne. The empire survives these crises because its administrative structure and military are so strong that they function even when leadership fails. But each crisis weakens the system a little more. The economy also has structural problems. The empire depends heavily on slavery, which reduces incentives for technological innovation. Why develop labor-saving devices when slave labor is cheap? The constant wars of the Republic brought floods of slaves, but once the empire stops expanding, the supply decreases while the demand remains. Economic growth slows. The empire also faces a persistent trade deficit with the East. Romans love silk from China, spices from India, and perfumes from Arabia, but have little to export in return except gold and silver. Precious metals drain eastward, destabilizing the currency. Emperors respond by debasing the coinage, mixing silver with copper, which causes inflation. Culturally, the empire becomes increasingly divided between Latin West and Greek East. The eastern provinces, more urbanized and wealthier, retain Greek as their primary language and maintain distinct cultural identities. The western provinces are more Romanized, but less economically developed. This division will eventually split the empire. Religious tensions also grow. Traditional Roman polytheism sits uneasily alongside the diverse religions of conquered peoples. Mystery cults promising salvation and eternal life attract followers. The worship of Isis from Egypt, Mithras from Persia, and increasingly, Christianity from Judea. Christianity begins as a Jewish sect following a preacher named Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified by Roman authorities around 30 CE for allegedly claiming to be the Jewish Messiah and King of the Jews. His followers believe he rose from the dead and is the Son of God who offers salvation to all who believe in him. The Apostle Paul transforms Christianity from a Jewish sect into a universal religion, preaching to Gentiles throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. The new religion spreads despite sporadic persecution. Christians refuse to worship the emperor or the Roman gods, which makes them seem disloyal and atheistic to Romans. Emperors like Nero and Diocletian persecute them brutally. But Christianity's message of hope, its tight-knit communities, and its promise of eternal life prove powerfully attractive, especially to the poor and oppressed. By the early 4th century, perhaps 10% of the empire's population is Christian. Everything is about to change dramatically. Chapter 11. The Fall of Rome. In the early 4th century CE, the Roman Empire faced mounting crises on every frontier. Germanic tribes press against the Rhine and Danube borders. The Persian Sassanid Empire threatens the East. The economy staggers under inflation, taxation, and declining trade. The army struggles to recruit soldiers and must increasingly rely on barbarian federates. Regional generals compete for power, fragmenting authority. The empire is too large, too complex, and too diverse to be governed effectively by a single emperor from a single capital. Something has to change. Emperor Diocletian, ruling from 284 to 305 CE, attempts radical reforms. He divides the empire into eastern and western halves, each with its own emperor, and appoints 2 junior emperors as designated successors, creating the tetrarchy, or rule of 4. He reorganizes the provinces, separates civil and military authority, and reforms the tax system. He tries to control inflation through price controls, though this fails. He launches the most severe persecution of Christians yet, attempting to eliminate what he sees as a divisive and disloyal force. Thousands die, but the persecution ultimately strengthens Christianity by creating martyrs whose courage impresses even pagans. Diocletian abdicates in 305 CE, hoping his succession system will prevent civil war. It doesn't. Within months, the tetrarchy collapses into exactly the kind of power struggle Diocletian hoped to avoid. From this chaos emerges Constantine, son of one of the tetrarchs. He fights his way to supremacy through a series of civil wars. In 312 CE, he faces his last rival, Maxentus, at the Milvian Bridge outside Rome. According to Christian sources, Constantine sees a vision of a cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He orders his soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields. His army wins decisively. Maecenas drowns in the Tiber while fleeing. Constantine emerges as the sole emperor of the West and attributes his victory to the Christian God. In 313 CE, he issues the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire and effectively ending the persecution of Christians. Constantine himself converts to Christianity, though he delays baptism until his deathbed. This is a revolutionary moment. For the first time, the Roman emperor is Christian. The persecuted sect becomes the favored religion of the state. Constantine showers the church with wealth and privileges. He builds magnificent churches, including the original St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. He convenes the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE to resolve theological disputes, particularly the controversy over Arianism, which questions Christ's divinity. The council produces the Nicene Creed, still recited by Christians today, affirming that Christ is true God from true God. Constantine also makes another momentous decision. He builds a new capital in the east, on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. He constructs Constantinople, the city of Constantine, dedicated in 330 CE. Constantinople is strategically located on the Bosporus Strait, controlling trade between the Mediterranean and Black Sea, between Europe and Asia. It is a Christian capital, adorned with churches rather than pagan temples, and it will outlast Rome itself by 1,000 years. After Constantine's death in 337 CE, the empire gradually but inexorably splits. Emperors occasionally reunited, but the division between East and West becomes increasingly permanent. The Western Empire faces far greater challenges. It's poor, less urbanized, and bears the brunt of barbarian invasions. The Eastern Empire, richer and more defensible, survives much more successfully. In 395 CE, Emperor Theodosius I dies, leaving the empire to his two sons. Arcadius gets the east, Honorius the west. This division will never be reversed. The Western Empire's final century is a slow-motion collapse punctuated by catastrophes. In 376 CE, the Huns, fierce nomadic warriors from Central Asia, push westward, displacing Germanic tribes who desperately seek refuge within Roman borders. The Goths, a Germanic people, petition Emperor Valens for permission to cross the Danube and settle in Roman territory. Valens agrees, but Roman officials exploit and abuse the refugees. In 378 CE, the Goths rebel. At the Battle of Adrianople, they annihilate a Roman army and kill Valens himself. It's a shocking defeat, proving that barbarian armies can destroy Roman legions. Even more significantly, the empire can no longer defend its borders. Instead, it must accommodate the barbarians, settling them within the empire as federates who theoretically serve Rome but increasingly act independently. On the last day of 406 CE, a catastrophe unfolds. The Rhine River freezes solid, a rare event. Vandals, Alans, and Suevi cross the frozen river into Gaul. The undermanned Roman defenses cannot stop them. For 3 years, these tribes rampage through Gaul, pillaging cities and devastating the countryside. They then cross the Pyrenees into Spain. The Vandals eventually move into North Africa, seizing the rich grain-producing provinces that feed Italy. Meanwhile, the Visigoths, having settled in the Balkans after Adrianople, march west under their king Alaric, seeking land and status within the empire. Frustrated by Roman duplicity, Alaric invades Italy. In August 410 CE, his Visigoths enter Rome through the Salarian Gate, opened by slaves or traders, and sack the city. The sack of Rome sends shockwaves throughout the ancient world. Rome has not been captured by a foreign enemy in 800 years. The eternal city, the capital that ruled the world, has fallen. Saint Jerome, writing in Bethlehem, laments, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." Pagans blame Christianity, claiming Rome fell because it abandoned the old gods. St. Augustine responds by writing The City of God, arguing that earthly cities always fall, but the city of God is eternal. The sack is traumatic but brief. The Visigoths leave after 3 days, moving north into Gaul and eventually settling in Spain. Rome survives, diminished but standing. But psychologically, the damage is immense. The aura of Roman invincibility is shattered forever. The Western Empire limps on for another 66 years, each decade weaker than the last. Britain is abandoned around 410 CE, left to defend itself against Pictish and Saxon raiders. The legions are withdrawn, never to return. Roman civilization in Britain gradually fades. North Africa falls to the Vandals by 439 CE. Most of Gaul and Spain slip from Roman control. The Western emperors become puppets, controlled by Germanic generals who command what remains of the army. These generals make and unmake emperors at will. In 476 CE, Odoacer, a Germanic general, deposes the last Western emperor, a boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, Little Augustus. Odoacer doesn't bother to appoint a new emperor. Instead, he declares himself king of Italy and sends the imperial regalia to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern Emperor as the sole legitimate Roman emperor. The Western Roman Empire has ended, not with a dramatic battle, but with an administrative decision by a barbarian general. Yet Rome doesn't completely vanish. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, survives and even thrives. Constantinople remains the largest, wealthiest, and most sophisticated city in the Christian world. Byzantine emperors still call themselves Romans, though they speak Greek rather than Latin. They preserve Roman law, architecture, and administrative practices. Under Justinian I, 527 to 565 CE, the Byzantines even reconquer North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain, temporarily restoring something resembling the old empire. But the effort exhausts the empire, and most of these reconquered territories are soon lost again. In the West, the Roman Empire's fall marks the transition from antiquity to the Middle Ages. The Germanic kingdoms that replace Rome gradually develop into medieval European states. Latin remains the language of the church and scholarship, ensuring continuity with the Roman past. Roman law influences medieval legal systems. The Christian Church, organized along Roman administrative lines, preserves literacy and learning through the monasteries. Cities shrink, trade declines, and population decreases. The complex civilization that Rome created fragments into smaller, simpler societies. Yet the memory of Rome never dies. Throughout the Middle Ages and beyond, Europeans dream of restoring the Roman Empire. Charlemagne is crowned Emperor of the Romans in 800 CE. The Holy Roman Empire, founded in 962 CE, claims to be Rome's successor. Napoleon crowns himself emperor, styling his rule on Roman precedents. Even Hitler's Third Reich evokes Rome. The fascist salute is the Roman salute. The symbol of authority, the fasces, is a Roman symbol. Why does Rome fall? Historians have proposed hundreds of explanations. Lead poisoning from water pipes, moral decay, Christianity undermining martial values, economic collapse, barbarian invasions, climate change, disease, and overextension. The truth is probably that many factors combine, each reinforcing the others in a cascade of decline. But perhaps the most important factor is this: the Roman Empire simply becomes too large and too complex to maintain. The distances are too vast, communication too slow, administration too unwieldy. Eventually, the center cannot hold. The empire fragments under its own weight. Yet even in falling, Rome shapes the future. The language, law, architecture, engineering, and administrative practices of Rome become the foundation of Western civilization. The dream of a united, peaceful, civilized world under law, the Pax Romana, remains an ideal that influences political thought for millennia. The transformation of the Roman world in the 5th century is not simply a story of decline and fall. It is also a story of adaptation, survival, and the birth of new civilizations. While the Western Empire crumbles, the provinces and peoples under Roman rule don't simply disappear. They transform, combining Roman traditions with Germanic customs, creating hybrid cultures that will eventually become medieval Europe. This process is messy, violent, and chaotic, but it's also creative and dynamic. The so-called Dark Ages are not as dark as once believed. They are a period of profound transformation, where the ancient world dies and a new world is born. The Germanic peoples who enter the empire are not mindless barbarians bent on destruction. They are complex societies with their own laws, customs, and cultures. Many have lived on Rome's borders for generations, trading with Romans, serving in Roman armies, and absorbing Roman influence. When they move into the empire, they don't come as conquerors seeking to destroy Roman civilization, but as migrants seeking land, security, and a share in Roman prosperity. Many Germanic leaders admire Rome and wanted to preserve it, not destroy it. They see themselves as rightful successors to Roman authority, defending the empire against other barbarians. The Visigoths, for example, fight on Rome's behalf against the Huns. The problem is that the Western Empire is too weak to control these new federates. The Germanic kingdoms that emerge are theoretically Roman allies, but in practice are independent states. The Ostrogoths, under their brilliant king Theodoric the Great, conquer Italy in the 490s. Theodoric rules from Ravenna, not Rome, which has declined dramatically in population and importance. But Theodoric presents himself as the successor to the Roman emperors. He maintains Roman laws and administrative structures. He employs Roman officials. He patronizes Roman learning and preserves classical culture. His court is a fusion of Germanic and Roman elements. Senators wear togas. Goths wear trousers and carry swords. Latin remains the language of government. Theodoric repairs aqueducts, restores buildings, and promotes trade. For a brief moment, it seems Italy might recover under enlightened barbarian rule. But after Theodoric's death in 526, his kingdom collapses into civil war, and the Byzantine Emperor Justinian seizes the opportunity to reconquer Italy. Justinian's reconquest proves catastrophic for Italy. The Gothic War, lasting from 535 to 554, devastates the peninsula. Cities are besieged and sacked repeatedly. The population plummets. The countryside is ravaged. Ancient infrastructure crumbles. Rome, which once housed over 1 million people, now has perhaps 30,000 inhabitants living among ruins. The aqueducts are cut during sieges and never fully repaired. The great buildings fall into decay. Wolves reportedly roam the Forum. When Byzantine forces finally win, Italy is so exhausted that it falls easy prey to the Lombards, another Germanic people, who invade in 568 and conquer most of the peninsula. The Byzantines retain only narrow footholds around Ravenna and in the far south. Italy, the heart of the Roman Empire, is now divided among multiple powers and will not be politically unified again until the 19th century. In Gaul, the Franks gradually emerge as the dominant power. Unlike other Germanic peoples who adopt Arian Christianity, the Franks under King Clovis convert directly to Catholic Christianity around 496, the same form of Christianity practiced by the Roman population. This proves a brilliant strategic move. The Catholic bishops, who are often the only remaining Roman authorities in cities, support the Franks against their Arian rivals. Clovis conquers most of Gaul, creating a kingdom that will eventually become France. The Merovingian dynasty he founds combines Germanic military traditions with Roman administrative practices and Catholic religious authority. The Frankish kingdom is crude compared to the Roman Empire, but it is viable and will ultimately prove more durable than the Byzantine attempts to restore direct imperial control. In Spain, the Visigoths establish a kingdom that lasts until the Muslim conquest in 711. In North Africa, the Vandals create a powerful maritime kingdom that raids Mediterranean shipping and even sacks Rome again in 455, conducting a more thorough looting than the Visigoths did 45 years earlier. In Britain, the withdrawal of Roman legions leaves a power vacuum. Celtic Britons fight among themselves and against invading Picts from Scotland. Desperate British leaders invite Saxon mercenaries from Germany to help defend them. The Saxons arrive, like the payment, and decide to stay. Over the next 2 centuries, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes conquer most of what is now England, pushing the Celtic Britons into Wales, Cornwall, and across the Channel to Brittany. Roman Britain vanishes almost completely, replaced by Anglo-Saxon England. Even the language changes. Latin disappears, replaced by Old English, a Germanic tongue. Urban life collapses. Christianity retreats, and paganism returns until missionaries from Ireland and Rome gradually reconvert the Anglo-Saxons, starting in the late 6th century. The Church becomes the primary institution preserving Roman civilization. As civil government collapses, bishops step into the void. In many cities, the bishop is the only authority maintaining order, organizing food distribution, negotiating with barbarian kings, and defending the city walls. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, gradually emerges as the most important religious leader in the West. Pope Leo I personally negotiates with Attila the Hun in 452, persuading him to withdraw from Italy. Whether Leo's eloquence or Attila's strategic calculations are more important is debatable, but the Pope gets credit for saving Rome. Pope Gregory I, who rules from 590 to 604, essentially governs Rome when Byzantine authority is nominal. He organizes the city's defense, feeds the population from church estates, and sends missionaries to convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons. He reforms church liturgy and administration. Medieval Christendom is taking shape. Monasticism becomes crucial to preserving learning. Saint Benedict of Nursia, living in the early 6th century, establishes a monastery at Monte Cassino and writes a rule governing monastic life. Benedictine monasteries spread across Europe. Monks take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They pray at fixed hours throughout the day and night. But they also work, and much of that work involves copying manuscripts. Monasteries become libraries and scriptoria where classical texts are preserved. Many ancient works survive only because monks painstakingly copied them, often not understanding what they were copying. Virgil's Aeneid, Cicero's speeches, Caesar's Gallic Wars, these and countless other works would have been lost if not for monastic preservation. Ironically, the Christian monks who copy these pagan texts sometimes disapprove of their content, but recognize their value as models of Latin style and grammar. Ireland, never conquered by Rome, becomes an unexpected center of learning and missionary activity. Irish monasteries preserve not just Latin texts, but also knowledge of Greek, which largely disappears in Western Europe. Irish monks like St. Columba and St. Columbanus travel to Scotland and continental Europe, founding monasteries and rekindling learning. The Irish produce magnificent illuminated manuscripts like the Book of Kells, demonstrating that artistic achievement continues even as political order collapses. From Ireland, Christianity and learning flow back into Europe, a reverse mission from the periphery to the center. In the East, the Byzantine Empire tells a very different story. Constantinople remains a thriving metropolis. The emperor commands a professional bureaucracy and a powerful military. Byzantine gold coins, the solidus, are accepted from Britain to India, testifying to the empire's commercial vitality. Greek fire, a secret weapon that burns on water, gives Byzantine ships a devastating advantage. Byzantine diplomacy is sophisticated, playing barbarian tribes against each other, bribing potential enemies, and maintaining a network of alliances. Byzantine culture flourishes. The reign of Justinian sees the construction of the Hagia Sophia, one of the architectural wonders of the world. Its vast dome, seemingly floating on light, represents the peak of late Roman engineering. Justinian also commissions the Corpus Juris Civilis, a comprehensive codification of Roman law that preserves and systematizes 1,000 years of legal development. This work profoundly influences European legal systems when it's rediscovered in the West during the 12th century. But the Byzantines face enormous challenges. Justinian's costly wars of reconquest in the West drained the treasury. A devastating plague strikes in 541, killing perhaps a third of the empire's population. The bubonic plague, the same disease that will later cause the Black Death, appears for the first time in European historical records. Constantinople loses half its population. The economy contracts. Justinian's successors struggle to maintain what he conquered. By 600, most of Italy is lost to the Lombards. More catastrophically, new enemies appear. The Sassanid Persian Empire, Rome's ancient rival, invades in the early 7th century, conquering Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. Persian armies reach the Bosporus itself, threatening Constantinople. The Byzantines appear doomed. But Emperor Heraclius, one of Byzantium's greatest rulers, refuses to surrender. He reorganizes the army, introduces new tactics, and personally leads his forces in a desperate counterattack. In a series of brilliant campaigns from 622 to 628, Heraclius invades Persia itself, defeats multiple Persian armies, and forces the Persians to surrender. He recovers the lost provinces and even captures the true cross, which the Persians had taken from Jerusalem. It seems a miraculous deliverance. Both empires, however, are exhausted by decades of warfare. And at this moment of mutual weakness, a new force explodes out of Arabia that will transform the entire region. In 610, a merchant in Mecca named Muhammad begins preaching a new monotheistic religion, Islam. He calls people to submit to Allah, the one God, and to follow the teachings revealed to him by the angel Gabriel. Meccan authorities persecute Muhammad and his followers, forcing them to flee to Medina in 622, an event called the Hijra that marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Muhammad becomes not just a religious leader, but a political and military one. He unites the feuding Arab tribes under the banner of Islam. When he dies in 632, his successors, the caliphs, lead Arab armies out of Arabia in a wave of conquest that stuns the world. The exhausted Byzantine and Persian empires cannot resist. Syria falls by 636, Egypt by 642. The entire Persian Empire collapses by 651, conquered completely by the Arabs. Within a century of Muhammad's death, the Islamic Caliphate stretches from Spain to India, creating one of the largest empires in history. The Islamic conquests permanently transform the Mediterranean world. The unity Rome created is shattered. The Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, is no longer a Roman lake but a frontier between Christian Europe and the Islamic world. Trade between East and West declines dramatically. Western Europe becomes more isolated, poorer, and more rural. The Byzantine Empire survives but is reduced to Anatolia, Greece, and parts of the Balkans. The prosperous eastern provinces, the richest parts of the old Roman Empire, are now under Muslim rule. A new civilization emerges in these conquered territories, blending Arab, Persian, Byzantine, and local elements. Baghdad, founded in 762 as the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, becomes the world's greatest city, a center of learning where Greek philosophy is translated into Arabic and advanced mathematics, astronomy, and medicine develop. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad preserves and expands on classical knowledge, while Christian Europe struggles in relative poverty and ignorance. Yet even in this fragmented world, the dream of Rome persists. In 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne, king of the Franks, as emperor of the Romans. Charlemagne has conquered most of Western Europe, creating an empire that resembles the old Western Roman Empire. The coronation is meant to restore the Western Empire, though the Byzantines, who never stopped claiming to be the Roman Empire, view this as illegitimate. The Carolingian Empire, as Charlemagne's realm is called, doesn't last long. It fragments after his death. But the idea takes root. In the West, the Pope can create emperors. This tension between papal and imperial authority will shape European politics for centuries. The fall of Rome is not a single event, but a process lasting centuries, and arguably, it never completely ends. The Byzantine Empire continues until 1453, when Ottoman Turks finally conquer Constantinople. Even then, the Ottomans call themselves Kaisar-i Rom, Caesar of Rome. The Holy Roman Empire, centered in Germany, claims to be Rome's successor until Napoleon dissolves it in 1806. The Russian Tsars claim to be the Third Rome, protecting Orthodox Christianity after Constantinople falls. European imperialism in the 19th and 20th centuries consciously models itself on Rome. The United States Capitol echoes Roman architecture. The fascist movements of the 20th century explicitly invoke Roman imagery. Rome never truly dies. It transforms, fractures, and reappears in new forms. The Roman Empire becomes an idea, a standard of civilization, a lost golden age to be recovered or surpassed. 2,000 years after Augustus, we still live in Rome's shadow, still grappling with the questions the Romans faced: how to build a diverse society under law, how to balance liberty and order, how to maintain an empire. The answers the Romans found were imperfect and ultimately unsustainable. But the questions remain urgent, and we continue seeking better answers, standing on the shoulders of the giants who built civilization from the mud of Mesopotamia to the marble halls of Rome. We've journeyed through nearly 200,000 years of human history, from the emergence of Homo sapiens in the African savanna to the fall of Rome and the end of the ancient world. It's a story of improbable triumph. We began as vulnerable primates with no natural weapons, no thick hides, no fangs or claws. We should have been evolutionary footnotes, extinct within a few generations. Yet we not only survived, we conquered the planet. How did we do it? The answer, as we've seen, lies not in our physical strength, but in our cognitive abilities. Our capacity for language, imagination, and cooperation allowed us to create complex societies bound together by shared myths, beliefs, and institutions. The agricultural revolution, beginning around 10,000 BCE, was the first great transformation. By learning to farm and domesticate animals, humans gained control over their food supply. This allowed populations to grow exponentially, but it also locked us into a new way of life. We became tied to the land, dependent on our crops, vulnerable to famine and disease. Yet agriculture made everything else possible. Without surplus food, there could be no cities, no specialized craftsmen, no priests or kings, no civilization. The rise of cities around 4000 BC in Mesopotamia marked humanity's second great leap. Cities concentrated people and resources, enabling unprecedented cooperation and specialization. They also created new problems. Warfare intensified, inequality grew, and epidemic diseases flourished. To manage the complexity of urban life, humans invented writing, initially for mundane accounting, but eventually for literature, law, and history. Writing allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations, each generation building on what came before. The pace of change accelerated. The great ancient civilizations, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, each found their own solutions to the challenges of organizing large populations. Some, like Egypt, achieved remarkable stability lasting millennia. Others, like the Mesopotamian city-states, were chronically unstable, constantly at war. Yet all shared certain features: centralized government, social hierarchy, specialized labor, monumental architecture, and complex religious systems that justified and reinforced the social order. These civilizations weren't perfect. They were built on the labor of slaves and peasants. Women were generally subordinated to men. Violence was omnipresent. Yet they represented a quantum leap in human organization and achievement. The Iron Age empires, Assyria, Persia, the Hellenistic kingdoms, demonstrated that diverse peoples could be united under a single government. The Persians, in particular, showed that empire didn't have to mean oppression. Cyrus the Great's policy of tolerance and respect for local customs created a stable, long-lasting empire. Meanwhile, in Greece, a different political experiment was underway. The Greeks invented democracy, the revolutionary idea that ordinary citizens could and should participate in government. Though limited to free male citizens, Greek democracy represented a radical alternative to monarchy and aristocracy. Greek philosophy, science, and art laid foundations for Western thought. Alexander the Great's conquests spread Greek culture across the ancient world, creating the cosmopolitan Hellenistic civilization that fused Greek and Eastern elements. But it was Rome that achieved the most enduring synthesis. The Roman Empire united the Mediterranean world under a single government for the first time, creating a vast zone of peace, prosperity, and cultural exchange. Roman law, engineering, and administration were marvels of practical organization. Yet Rome also contained the seeds of its own destruction. Its size made it ungovernable. Its reliance on slavery limited innovation. Its military power generated constant expansion until it could expand no more. And then the system began to contract. Christianity, emerging from the ruins of the Jewish-Roman War, offered something the classical world lacked: a universal message of hope, equality before God, and salvation available to all regardless of social status. Initially persecuted, Christians eventually converted the empire itself. When Rome fell in the West, the Church preserved much of classical learning and became the organizing principle of medieval European civilization. What lessons can we draw from this vast sweep of history? First, that human societies are fragile and impermanent. Every civilization we've discussed eventually declined or fell. Egypt, which lasted 3,000 years, eventually became a Roman province. Rome, which seemed eternal, collapsed. Nothing lasts forever. But second, that human creativity and resilience are boundless. Each collapse is followed by renewal. New civilizations rise from the ashes of old ones, often reaching new heights. The fall of Rome led to the European Middle Ages, which in turn gave birth to the Renaissance and modernity. Third, that progress is not inevitable. The Bronze Age civilizations were in many ways more sophisticated than the early medieval societies that followed Rome's fall. Technology can be lost. Knowledge can be forgotten. Societies can regress as well as advance. But fourth, that over the very long term, human knowledge and capability have generally accumulated. We know more than our ancestors, can do more, can support larger populations. The trajectory, despite setbacks, is generally upward. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, our history shows that humanity's greatest strength is also our greatest vulnerability. Our ability to cooperate in large numbers based on shared beliefs enables us to build civilizations, but it also enables us to wage devastating wars. Our capacity for innovation and adaptation has allowed us to survive every crisis so far. But it has also created new problems, from nuclear weapons to climate change, that threaten our survival. The story of early civilizations is the story of us learning, often painfully, how to live together in ever larger and more complex societies. As we face the challenges of our own time, climate change, technological disruption, political polarization, and more, we would do well to remember the lessons of our ancestors. Civilizations that adapt and innovate tend to survive. Those that become rigid and refuse to change tend to fall. Societies that find ways to include more people in prosperity and decision-making tend to be more stable than those based on narrow elites. And perhaps most importantly, the problems we face, however daunting they seem, are not unprecedented. Our ancestors faced existential threats and survived. They built great civilizations from nothing. We carry their legacy. We have their resilience, their creativity, and their determination. The story of humanity is far from over. In many ways, it's just beginning.